What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Can Business Save the Planet? Today, I am joined by Annie Agle, an absolute rock star in the sustainability space, and super excited to dive in today to connect with her on Cotopaxi's sustainability and just impact overall. So, Annie, pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I love it. So before we dive into Cotopaxi, I'd love to understand you and learn a little bit more about your why. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and how you got involved in the sustainability space and some of your hobbies and just who you are as a person.
Sure. Yeah, I'm always the first to say I sort of tripped and fell and aimed my fall in the general direction of sustainability. I feel like a lot of times we present our backgrounds as these sort of neat and tidy packages. And the reality is it probably never feels like that. So I really started my journey in sustainability by growing up in Park City, Utah. I was born and raised in the mountains and had a sort of front row seat to the changes that nature was experiencing due to climate change. So starting to see things like aspen leaves not staying as vibrantly yellow for as long due to the fact that there was some molding going on that hadn't been frozen due to warmer and warmer summers and shorter and shorter winters. And so, sort of witnessing those things in my own backyard has always made me hyper aware of the reality of climate change. It's something you can actually see and taste and witness when you're living that close to nature. So I think that's always something that had really stayed with me. And then I've always just been really curious about the human condition, about what life looked like for other humans, what their realities were, what were the kind of things that impacted their quality of life, what were those connections that make the human condition a shared experience, and how to lean into that. I was always trying to sort of understand myself and the context around me. I don't think that's that unusual for anyone in our space. I think there's just a degree of perspective and thoughtfulness and wanting to be part of a human community that was thriving. Yeah. And in college, I had the opportunity. I was studying both military history and chemical engineering.
Okay.
And ended up with a really phenomenal internship that was doing sort of human rights as well as sustainability research at the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan intervention. So it was an international NGO, very much more in the aid space. I think at the time, there were definitely obviously some pioneers in the sustainability space, but it still wasn't a real professional space. That wasn't something you could focus in or major in at college at the time. You could either only do like environmental studies or international politics.
Yep.
I sort of ended up somewhere in between the two of those two things. But really, as a result of being part of this organization, which had me researching everything from the ways in which the Russian mob would leverage climate events to increase arms and human trafficking shipments.
Okay.
We don't think about these things, but you want to talk about ways in which climate change impact things like human rights.
Yeah.
There were a lot of very frightening people weaponizing climate change to their advantage. And we saw that in New York during Hurricane Sandy. Another example that we saw was that when ISIS had come on the scene, one of the things that they did to establish an incredibly strong power base very quickly is not only did they go after oil refineries, which in and of itself is a sustainability-oriented move, right, to think about energy management, but they also went after every single natural water aquifer in their entire region. And that's the other thing that they gained control over practically overnight.
Wow.
And it really left a very deep impression on me that has stayed without my career and really stayed with me at Cotopaxi is this idea that you can't solve these nested problems like climate change and human rights abuses without working in tandem. You need to look at resolutions that are encompassing. And then after that, I was able to work in this sort of nascent impact investing space for a while, which was very illuminating. And then from there, I went into CSR and sustainability consulting, where I had the opportunity of working, with everything from very grassroots-oriented projects to some of the largest retailers in the world.
Okay.
And then I thought that I did want to be in the outdoor space, and Cotopaxi reached out, and I think the CEO, he just has such a strong sense of character, and their mission, which I definitely can't take credit for, the two co-founders, Stefan and Davis, had founded this company on the idea that we needed to solve for economic inequality, that economic inequality was increasing to an enormous margin, and that they wanted to create as sustainable of a company as they could and tie that to improvements to society that were really addressing economic disparity.
Yes. Understandable. And yeah, Davis, I look up to him. I followed him for a long time on LinkedIn, and like just starting the company and his mission trips and his survival trips in the Bahamas and things like
he's the softest spoken guy I've ever met. He's such a nice man, but he's much tougher than you think he is.
Yeah, no, seems like an absolute legend. I love how he's handling everything. So and started such an amazing company, or co-founded it such an amazing company. And so it sounds like your experience, especially in the consulting area, being able to work with grassroots organizations as well as big corporations, you've been exposed to kind of all the different aspects of sustainability and really just trying to understand how businesses are trying to implement that within their framework. So, and then that set you up going into Cotopaxi. And so your formal role for Cotopaxi is?
Vice President of Sustainability and Impact.
I love it. Okay.
Best title you could have, I think.
I agree.
Love what I do.
I agree, 100%.
It's a great job.
Absolute rock star. And so I'd love to understand Cotopaxi's circular business model. I understand that you guys leverage a significant amount of recycled materials, and circularity is very important to you. So, for our listeners out there trying to understand how they would potentially look at utilizing recycled materials in their supply chains, what's your guys' vision on it, and how has that come to life over the years?
I think the first part of circularity, for circularity to really work, one, you need to understand your context. And so the first thing I would say is the apparel and fashion industry is so unsustainable. It's actually mad, given that we're not making MRI or life-saving machines. We're in the business. The outdoor world is about sort of providing the gear to go live a more experience-forward life. But let's be real, the majority of the fashion industry, and including aspects in certain products that we make, it's about peacocking, right? We're not talking about things that are gonna necessarily really drive your quality of life.
Sure.
And there's an enormous amount of waste, and particularly with the rise of these instant fashion companies like Shein and Temu, right? Shein is now producing more products in 10 days than Zara does in a year, just for context.
Wow.
Right? Like, we're talking about a different level of fast fashion than we've seen.
Yes.
Last year, to support the plastics that went into Shein products, China increased its coal usage by 20%, the largest increase in its coal production in the last 10 years. And that was to feed instant fashion. And so I think when people are in this space, one, they don't really understand the imperative of circularity.
Yep.
They also really don't understand the extent to which that the plastics that are going into your clothes is propping up the fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
Right. Plastics are now around 20% of fossil fuel profits. It's a huge part of their business.
Yep.
They know they can lean into that business when they have to pull out of other areas. Frankly, a lot of times you're wearing crude oil. And if it's coming from China and these fast fashion companies, or you're purchasing it off of Amazon or some of these other mega conglomerates, right? You could be wearing lead. You're definitely wearing PFAS, which are basically cancer causing. They're infertility causing. There's wild chemistry in that. And so a few steps that Cotopaxi has taken from day one. First, there's a lot of buzz around materials, right? Recycled materials, bio-based materials. In order for something to be circular, you need to think about the entire product life and the context, right? You can't just think about these little material choices, right? You need to think about this entire journey a product goes through. And so the first number one thing that we have done is not just design from recycled materials, but really lean into dead stock. We are sitting on enough existing fabric to clothe the next 9 generations of humans. There's no need for any virgin inputs for the things that we make. There really shouldn't be.
Yep.
And while recycled, we see recycled materials as a strong intermediary, but not an end state. Using what has already been made decouples what your company needs for fabrics from fossil fuel. and
Got
in
it.
a wider, just like a wider context. And a lot of times you get so into the weeds using these things called life cycle analyses about these individual emissions-based reports on particular fabrics that you lose sight of the big picture.
Yep.
And it is so important that we decouple from fossil fuels.
Yes.
And so we've really been in the game of how do we design from waste instead of designing in ways that produce waste. And I'm the first to say circularity is a journey, right?
Yes.
The ability of companies to be circular too is tied to the ability of society to be circular. And
Sure.
particularly in America, we are nowhere near that, right?
Yep.
We need trash collection statements or stations. We need much better textile recycling technology that has patient capital that is being integrated into our municipal waste systems, right?
Yep.
We're very far away from that. And so, yes, Cotopaxi, we hit what we refer to as our 3 R's, which is making sure that every product of ours is either made from repurposed materials or dead stock, recycled materials, and also carries one third-party responsible designation, such as fair trade, organic, blue sign. And so we achieved that last year. So I'm proud to say that I don't think we have a single principal fabric in our lineup now that is not recycled, repurposed, or using clean or recycled chemistry. And so I think setting those goals is great. They're achievable. I also think there's a very long way to go in terms of making sure that we're not just moving on this as an individual actor in Cotopaxi.
Sure.
And that's the hard part, right? It's really easy to get obsessed about what one company is doing vis-a-vis another company. And listen, at Cotopaxi, like I'm proud to say, yeah, like we do the things. We do the things. We're not the only brand out there, but we're definitely one of a few brands that does feel like they're about 20 of us that show up consistently. It's not as many as it should be, but we show up for that fight. But as a society, we got a long way to go.
Yes.
And so that's really what we're leaning into now.
Understandable. I love that statement. It is a journey. I think we tell everyone, progress, not perfection. It is one thing at a time, trying to build towards it. So that's amazing to hear. Congratulations, by the way, to implement that with your entire line. That's a big win. And I think that, you guys are setting the example for other businesses and being a role model in that space, which is a huge win.
I appreciate it.
Of course.
I think it is important, though, that we look outside of ourselves as businesses right now. I think circularity, right, there's a growing understanding between brands that we've all sort of crossed the boxes for what we can do, which is things like re-commerce, having repair, a strong warranty.
Yep.
And we know that we have these extended producer responsibility pieces of legislation that are holding companies increasingly accountable for their packaging, for their waste. And that's a right and good thing. But companies also need to come together in a more tactical and meaningful way to say, hey, what are the services that we really need to ensure get developed to make this sing? It can't just be Cotopaxi and Patagonia and a few players really leaning into these ideas, but Shein is allowed to operate how it operates without any constraints on that kind of business model, right? We really need to come together as considerate businesses to ensure that we're operating on a level playing field and that there's mutual accountability across our sector. There's work to be done there.
Yes. There's always work to be done. I completely agree with you on that. 100%. And when it comes to as far as transparency in the sustainability efforts, I'm curious to see how you view that and how you guys have taken certain steps to try and be transparent with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and what you think other businesses should be doing as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, first of all, I think more than anything else, it starts with an impact report. I think there's a huge opportunity to bring back sincerity Well, there might never have been sincerity, but actually making sure that there is a degree of sincerity in impact reports. And I believe in showing receipts, man. It's not pretty. It's not a marketing thing. My marketing department, and I was like, listen, we can tell stories within those achievements, but if you look at our impact report, man, it's receipts. It's not sexy, right?
Yeah.
Like, exactly where we're at as a company. Exactly where we haven't gotten to yet. You could definitely see that accountability, and I agree in that. I also hope that anyone who reads our impact report starts to think about like, oh, well, why isn't that in other companies' impact reports? That's like a little shady,
Yes.
And it is, right? I think transparency is really important. I think businesses in general need to recognize that they've lost the faith of consumers.
Yes.
And there's an opportunity for that. Actually, if you're marketing and you're impact marketing, one of the things I always say makes for successful impact marketing is solving the trust complex that consumers have, right? If you actually try to solve for that, and if you actually try to provide education, like there's a meaningful knowledge piece that gets communicated through that marketing to the consumer about like, ooh, I should probably think about clean chemistry. I'd never really realized the fact that I was wearing crude oil on my body, and that like might not be something that I actually want to do. And so I think that storytelling and transparency is a very critical part of impact. And we live in times where, there's this fine line between misinformation, information, and the place in between those two states, which is neither informative nor unfactual, but isn't really truthful, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd say truthfulness is very important to us at Cotopaxi.
Understandable. And I completely agree with you. And I think that, it's great to see that there's movement across the board, leading by example. And I think that I like your example of, business will say, hey, well, why isn't this in other people's impact reports? And the fact that, a lot of things are results, because a lot of teams can spend a ton of time making a very fancy, great looking presentation. But if the data is not there, then it's kind of hollow, right? So that's great. And I love that you guys are pushing that forward. And when it comes to like the partnerships in the outdoor industry, you mentioned some brands, right? Patagonia, et cetera. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as far as the role that outdoor brands play in this space and the partnerships that you see across the board that are helping to drive this initiative forward and move the needle.
The first thing I'd say is we enjoy the greatest industry association I've ever worked with, which is the Outdoor Industry Association. That industry association is held together by values, shared values across outdoor brands. Being in the outdoor industry definitely has been a huge breath of fresh air for me. We breathe rarefied air in this industry. The values consistency across competitor peers is something I've never enjoyed in previous roles in my career. And it makes a world of difference, right? We are able to go into a shared supplier, right? Obviously, across the outdoor industry, there's only so many suppliers who can truly make the kinds of technical products that we offer to our customers, which means that we have a very consolidated set of partners. And we know that 97+% of our emissions as companies occur within the supply chain. And that's where the vast majority of our human rights abuses and labor abuses occur. Right, so that's where the real opportunity is to move the needle. And there's a strong element as well of climate justice and social justice when you really lean into shared investment ideas in the supply chain. And OIA, we're part of 2 collaborations, one about helping a huge pack supplier and a large economic zone in Philippines transition to renewables, and the other about extending clean heat initiatives into our shared tier 2 fabric providers. And so, those are shared investments. One of them is really with REI. The other is with Patagonia and a variety of other brands. But there are many brands who are part of these things. And I think it's very heartwarming for me and validating to see different peers come together to move the needle on behalf of wider civil society. I think that's really a lesson that other people around the world could take a note from in terms of what companies could do to work together to solve hard problems. Because, again, there's so much attention now on individual SBTI goals, right? These science-based target initiatives. to put it in context, Cotopaxi's entire carbon footprint is 40,000 tons of carbon.
Uh-huh.
And we are looking at trillions of tons of carbon in terms of emissions from fossil fuels. Like, you need to have perspective about what matters, right? This idea that, like, this focus on one material shift at one small little B Corp company, that does not move the needle. And in many ways, there is this risk that it actually distracts from this wider issue of accountability from how we manufacture and use energy as a human civilization, right? And so I think these projects that are done in collaboration are the ones where you actually really see kilowatt hour reductions that are meaningful and go beyond one company, but really can take an economic zone, a region, towards renewables. I mean, one of the initiatives we're a part of, which is part of the amazing State Department, called SETI, as well as SEBA, the Clean Energy Buyers Association. It is pooling shared company investment and going to government. So we were recently in discussions with the energy minister for Indonesia about helping the major principal manufacturing and economic zones in Indonesia be supported entirely by renewables. And so, I mean, we're talking about kilowatt hours in, tens of millions, hundreds of millions potentially, and changing for it in the positive and influencing their energy policy, right? And that was across everyone from, tiny little Cotopaxi us to Pepsi Cola and Heineken to Nike and Adidas, right? And so these are the kinds of collaborative mechanisms that really can influence global energy in a positive way. And particularly with our current political reality in America, we need to be leaning into different collaborations, different collective building initiatives that really pool resources to make meaningful needle movements, not just for your little reduction plans as an individual company. This is not going to be enough.
That I agree. I think at the end of the day, we one of our core values is we're in this together, and I think that's something that is very relevant. Is that when you collectively pull everything together, that's when the needle really can get moved in a pretty significant way. I mean, I think that when it comes to the different brands working together, especially in the outdoor space, right? So you mentioned that this is something that you're very fortunate and feel very excited to see the alignment of values. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Like, one thing that we're trying to do here at 4Ocean is we're trying to get more people out on the ocean. We try to get more people out on the ocean at the beach to enjoy the outdoors, to get away from electronics, to be able to enjoy nature and appreciate the resource that we have here, to develop a little bit more of that appreciation, so that when we talk about conserving it's more widely accepted. Do you feel that there's such an alignment in terms of the goals, because most people in the outdoor space are out, they're camping, they're hiking, they're enjoying these places, so they have that passion? Like, do you feel that is a pretty big driver for the outdoor industry, and why you feel that the OIA is a great win when it comes to alignment between core values?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a very small subsect of humanity that enjoyed the sort of confluence of factors that allowed them to live more experiential lives that involved a really strong nature component, right? It's a very small portion of us, but I do think that people who are able to spend that time in nature and seek that out are thoughtful. They consider their place in a wider set of systems.
Yes.
And, I mean, it's amazing, the data. I feel like there's an article a day that comes out about just how important time in nature is to things like circadian rhythms, mental health, right? Like, all of these things we know. Like, I have very severe autism and ADHD, and I just knew from youngest memory, like, I would just, like, if I could just go outside for 5 to 10 minutes, if I could just be in nature, I could calm myself down. I would stop, having a nonverbal period, right? Like, many of us in this space have experienced firsthand the immensely positive and noticeable impacts of being in nature. And I think, if you spend time in oceans, you're definitely going to run into plastic issues pretty quickly, right? Like, you spend time on the mountain skiing, it's pretty apparent that our winters are shrinking in terms of the number of days you can get on a mountain every year, right? Like we see these things in a way that it's like we don't have to look at climate data sets or their interpretations. We experience it. We see it. It's very apparent, right?
Yeah.
Like it's wild to me that anyone could question climate science just based on the data. But I think part of that is like, I don't know that I ever felt like I required the data. The data confirms something that I was already witnessing for myself.
Sure.
And I do think companies too have a sense, just a stronger sense of urgency around it, obviously, because it's also tied to our businesses.
Yeah.
Right. I will tell you, one of the things the industry is dealing with right now is that we're all carrying excess insulation inventory. And that's because our winters have been too hot the last couple of years. So things like puffy jackets didn't sell as well as we thought they did.
Wow. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
There's like, we're having to think about these things as businesses, right? If you're in the outdoor resort community, right? If you're a Vail or an Alterra or an Aspen One, right? Climate change is one of the largest threats to your bottom line that you have to internalize as a business. So I do think like there's also a business imperative side to solving for climate change that you don't see in other sectors.
Sure. I that really resonated with what you were saying as far as getting outside and getting outdoors. I could not agree with you more. And I'm the same way. I need to get outside. I have to get on the ocean. I mean, I grew up and spent almost all my time as a little kid on the water, and going to high school, it was very structured, and I think once I got into college, that's where I was able to get back into my groove and spend time outdoors because of the balance. And I think that I will tell you that getting people to see the problem firsthand has been a big needle mover for us. So like when it comes to ocean plastic, there's a lot of people, in our area that we have pretty clean beaches in Florida. We have recreational services that clean up the beaches. There's not large volumes of plastic. So a lot of people, I get asked all the time, like, hey, is the plastic problem really that bad? Like, is it, I see a lot of these facts, and you hear the classic island of plastic twice the size of Texas out, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Yeah. And everyone's like, I just don't see that much plastic. And I will tell you that getting individuals out on the boat and taking them to the mangrove shorelines and taking them down here in the Florida Keys and in South Florida, we are able to bring them and show them exactly what's in these coastlines. Yeah. And a lot of the times people have asked me like, hey, like, did you guys put this plastic here? And we're like, no, like this is exactly what's happening every day. And we'll go up and down, 20, 30 miles of a coastline, and everywhere that you walk up into the mangroves is loaded with plastic debris. And what I will tell you is that the sentiment that those individuals had prior to going out in the boat and experiencing it was a little hesitation. Like, I don't really know, the beaches are always kind of clean, to like, oh my gosh, this is a massive problem. Like, we've got to cut down on single-use plastics. We've got to eliminate this stuff. And I think that's a big driver. And so that's something that we're trying to do here at 4Ocean is leverage our platforms for awareness. We believe that starting the conversation is one of the most important things that we can do, and showing the problem that exists and trying to connect with more people out there to get that conversation started. Because at the end of the day, if we as consumers are voting with our dollar and trying to find the more sustainable outlets and sustainable solutions, I think that's what's going to really move the needle across the board. So I definitely resonated with that as far as being able to see the problem firsthand, because we experience it all the time when we have guests on our boat.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's fantastic you do that. That's absolutely fantastic. Because I just don't think there's so many problems out there, right? There's just so many problems, and trying to get the attention that a problem needs. Yeah. In order to get it prioritized, it's always a struggle, right? It's always a struggle of trying to find that balance between, not just making sure that your soapbox issue is taking place of another soapbox issue. Yeah. It's always a challenge, but I don't think people can truly care with what they don't see. I just don't.
Yeah.
And it's a huge reason too. I really think it's important that sustainability officers emphasize human health, like the human health impacts of things like climate, of plastics, of these different elements of changed environment and how threatening they are to human health, because that's something that can relate back to the person immediately, right?
Yes.
Immediately. Like your underwear shouldn't be making it less likely for you to have children, right? Like there's stuff like that
Yes.
when people are like, wait, what? Hold up, go back
Yes.
to that. Like revisit that statement.
Rewind.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And I think that we need to respect that as sustainability officers. Sometimes I think it's very easy to get cynical and feel like people don't care.
Yeah.
You need to treat that more like a challenge. Like if they don't care, how can you use that as a challenge? Like, how do you get them to care? How do you, without overwhelming them or making it so depressing that they just shut down and disengage? How do you get them to care in a timely fashion and in an actionable way? That's a huge part of what our job is, I think.
I think that's a great comment. And that's actually a huge topic that I always love covering is that, we try to present the information in a way that is definitely shock and awe because we want to show how bad the problem is, right? When I'm standing on a football field full of plastic that's 6 feet deep on a coastline, like it's kind of like showing that shock factor of like, hey, this is the problem. It does exist. But then also trying to still stay optimistic about it because I do believe that consumers by nature, they can be overwhelmed and they can get really hit with that like, well, what impact can I have? Look at how bad that problem is. What are my actions really going to have as far as an impact on this issue around the world? And so we still try to stay super optimistic, very upbeat. Like, guys, we can do this. We got this. Like, together, it's going to take a lot of work. But you know what? We think that if we can drive drive the awareness and come out with these potential solutions for some of this plastic packaging, we can have an impact on the amount of plastic entering into the ocean. So I think that is important with connecting with consumers and just showing them, like, what can be done. Like, your small impact. It's not only just a matter of, like, cutting down on that plastic water bottle and bringing your reusable mug or bringing your reusable cutlery. I think those are the things that really drive it forward and they start the conversation. Because if we can start the conversation and get more people aligned, then we know the issue, we understand it, we can see it, and now we can start taking the necessary steps. And when you can get mass market adoption, now you're going to start changing things for the corporations that are producing the plastic for the brands and the brands that are producing the plastic for the consumers. So I think it's that trickle-down economic impact that's really going to be seen across the board. So, we try and stay positive, try and stay optimistic, and really drive it home because we do believe that we can, end the ocean plastic crisis if we work together.
Absolutely. I love that. It's fantastic. It's really all about that coalition building between everyday citizens, experts, businesses, policymakers, et cetera. You got to do that coalition building work.
Yes, I agree. And what advice would you have for anybody out there that's like getting started in the sustainability space? Maybe it's a consumer, maybe it's somebody who's head of their sustainability committee at their job where they might not have sustainability ingrained in their DNA. What would you give as a recommendation for somebody to really be able to help create an impact?
I think the first thing is understand that there's no barrier to entry to contributing to solving this crisis, right? You don't need it in your title. You don't need to get paid for it, right? I mean, those might be where you want to be. Start with working with what you're having. I believe very strongly that sustainability must be democratized much more effectively than it has been, and we need to continue that work all the time.
Sure.
One example I have of this in Cotopaxi is when I'd been in Cotopaxi for around 2 years, there was a really incredible young woman who was entry to mid-level career in the logistics department, and we had unfortunately received news that an ocean container of our goods had been waterlogged, and those products were no longer fit for sale.
Got it.
And in the apparel industry, the way you claim insurance is showing proof of destruction. I'm not even kidding you. You basically light your products on fire and you show proof that they were destroyed via incineration, and then you get your insurance claim.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, you're serious.
That's how most businesses operate. Oh, not at all. No,
yeah,
I mean, and a lot of times companies will actually build this into their P&L and actually make product to incinerate it to get the insurance claim. I'm not even kidding. That's how broken these like instant fashion companies are, right? And Danny reached out to me and she said, listen, this is not values consistent. I feel very uncomfortable with this. Is there any alternative? And so, this is not a person with sustainability in their title, but this is a person who is thinking with sustainability, who is wearing their sustainability hat as a logistics member of our team. And, we have a team where it's like everyone knows that if they encounter something that's values inconsistent in terms of our business practices, they should come to me right away, right?
Yep.
We need to bring that into alignment. We need to look at that business path. We need to look at alternative actions that we can take.
Yep.
And so we were able to go to our much larger, progressive, unicorn logistics providers, a Flexport. And I was like, man, we got to do something different. Like, is there a way that we could show proof of donation instead of proof of destruction to get an insurance claim? And Flexport took that as homework. And at the time, we were too small of a company to instigate that change with a larger insurance carrier, right? That wasn't going to happen. But Flexport, who represents tens of billions of dollars in shipped good business, was able to go to an insurance provider and say, hey, let's make this happen. And so now for our shipment, but also for any other person who's part of the Flexport network, they can now show proof of donation instead of proof of destruction when it comes to insurance.
Wow.
That whole change came from one, 23, 25-year-old in mid-level employee starting their career in logistics, right? And so to people in this space, like, we need everybody.
Yes.
Like, you got a beating heart. We need you focused on sustainability. And, frankly, like, I've been in this space a long time. And, it was funny, like, a couple weeks ago, they were like, well, you're an expert at sustainability. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. That's like being an expert at being a good person. Like, I would never say that about myself. Like, I understand a few things about a few things. I can get really dorky on material science. Like, I know how to, conduct and interpret a life cycle analysis or set a science-based target. But, like, I'm not a sustainability expert. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, we're all figuring out what being an expert at living sustainably actually looks like, right?
Yes.
Like, there's a lot of inconsistencies that are baked into how I live as an American, right? There's so many issues like that. And so I think there's this idea or this sense that you need to have a certain background to be a sustainability person. That's just not true. I'm sure a lot of people in my industry don't like that because it's like doesn't give us job security or something. But like, I'm like, come on, let's be honest. It's about getting everybody in the door right now.
Yes, getting more people to the party, and honestly, that's such an inspiring story because when you think about it, if all of those clothes were being incinerated, that was a process not happening not only with your business, but how many hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses out there, and how often was that happening? And that to come from someone. Did you say Danny? It was Danny?
Yeah.
Shout out Danny. Big shout out Danny. That is
When,
amazing. Yeah. Mad props to you because look at that. Now it's being rolled out across the entire provider, and now they're how many goods are being donated versus just incinerated. That's unbelievable. So I think that's great advice for anybody listening is that it doesn't matter if you have sustainability in your title. It doesn't matter your level or role or rank within the business. You always have a voice, and you can share that voice and try and do what you can to create some alternative options when it comes to how things are being done and make suggestions. I mean, at the end of the day, the worst thing that could happen is just say, it's just not in the cards, but you can always suggest them. So I love that story, and that's very, very inspiring across the board.
It is. There's a lot of inspiration to be had out there if you sort of open your heart and mind to it.
Yes, I agree. And Annie, so talk to me about Cotopaxi. What in terms of what's next and what's in the future and what you guys haven't necessarily been able to get to yet, but you've got your eyes locked on it and you really are still working towards it. What are some of these things that you guys still want to accomplish?
I think for us, we feel that we've covered a lot of ground internally, right? And I don't say that as like, we're doing all the good things. It's not about that. I'm telling you that I kind of had this crisis of conscience like 18 months ago where I realized that our carbon intensity score was already under 1%. We have, at least by the estimations I could carry out based on publicly available information, we have the lowest carbon footprint per product of any company in the outdoor space. Right?
That's incredible.
We've been doing those things. It is incredible, but I'll be honest with you, it's not adding up to anything.
Sure.
Right? Like I look around and it's like the climate crisis is no better off, right?
Sure.
And that we've been putting a lot of time and effort, and there's the expectation, right? We don't have a choice with reporting requirements now, and I do think that companies need to be held accountable to their carbon footprints. I do think that. At the same time, that if we're going to solve this crisis, we need way, way bigger numbers in terms of reductions. And so I've really been focused much more on policy, regulation, coalition building, et cetera. So, and not just for climate, but also for human rights. I think there's this part of this conversation that is getting lost. Like, I want to be clear, if you're buying a product, chances are there was a human rights abuse that occurred somewhere along that supply chain. There's a huge difference between the way a company like Cotopaxi and Shein operates, but we have found a frightening labor abuse every year that we go through our supply due diligence, right? It is so baked in to capitalism that I think people are not truly aware of, frankly, how complicated every product manufacturing is, right? Everything that we touch and hold has a natural capital investment. And if you look at something like a Shein product, right, you could sell the water or the cotton that goes into their T-shirts for more than the T-shirt sells, right? They're actually managing to post a profit on net destruction of nature, right? Which is an insane business model, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think I had this moment of like, this isn't enough. This isn't enough. And I'm not the only one thinking like this. Like, you have people like Auden Schlender at Aspen One who, are saying like, SBTI, by all means, go do those things. But like, we need to stop subsidies. We need to start regulations that are really going to hold our entire way of life accountable for its contribution to climate change. That we're still not in a symbiotic relationship with our habitat. That is frightening, right? And so I think a huge part of my work now is working with other companies, getting uncomfortably close to competitor peers in terms of coming together for this coalition work. So, I mean, we have a big series of talks with the Taiwanese government to help discontinue predatory labor practices used to recruit foreign migrant workers.
Okay.
That's coming up recently, so I'll be in Taipei for those discussions, along with other brands and representatives from the American Apparel and Footwear Association. That represents kind of precedent-setting talk of corporations coming together to work with a government to fix loopholes in labor laws that are causing abuses for millions of people. I don't think people realize the scale of just how bad human rights abuses are in supply chains. The International Labor Organization, the ILO, estimates that there are around 300 million workers who experience labor abuses or slave labor conditions. Just for context, that's the entire population of the United States. And from an apparel perspective, right, for formal work, 1 in 3 women globally is employed in apparel supply chains, right?
Wow.
And we have a ways to go. We've got a ways to go. Like, visiting factories is intense. It's seeing how the sausage gets made in capitalism is pretty sobering. Going into a factory where you see 1,100 women sitting at a sewing machine going like this for 9 hours is intense. It's intense. It's not a life I would want for myself. It's not, And so, the only thing that's really going to close the gaps, we do all these audits and due diligence, and don't get me wrong, are those things better than nothing? Yes. In the same way, SBTI is like, yes, corporations should do everything in their power to take responsibility for themselves. I feel very strongly about that. Same with individuals. But I also think you need to keep in context with just how bad and significant the problems are at the macro level. And using your voice as a corporation to build those coalition components and then have the conversations with the people who can really move the needle, which are governments, right? It's governments and huge industry associations. These are the things that can truly move the needle. And so that's a huge part of what I consider to be my imperative at the side, is not like resting on our laurels at Cotopaxi, but really helping to use our voice, our skills of collaboration, our kind of experience actioning things like circularity, like climate progress, like economic equality and meaningful corporate philanthropy, and really making sure that those don't just stay within our own 4 walls and our customer base and our nice, sort of gentle, happy-go-lucky, nature-focused industry, right? Really going out into the world to try to move the needle in a much more meaningful way. So that's really what I'm focused on right now.
Love it. Love it. Well, Annie, this has been so amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time. If anyone wants to learn a little bit more about Cotopaxi or get in touch with you, what do you think is the best way to learn more?
I'm on LinkedIn, Annie Agle. I am always open to conversations, new connections. I like being parts of conversations in our space. I enjoy that a lot. And Cotopaxi is cotopaxi.com. You can hold us accountable.
I love it.
Go fishing for information. Go find our stories.
I love that. I love that. Well, and viewers, if you guys are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think on Annie and I's conversation. Any suggestions that you have for future discussions. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. If you guys want to learn more about us, 4ocean.com. We'd love to have different guests on to talk about sustainability and the world's most pressing issues across the board. And until then, we're going to keep cleaning the ocean, and we're going to keep asking, can business save the planet? Thank you so much for coming on, Annie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a delight.
Of course, of course. All right, that wraps up our conversation. Annie is an absolute rock star and very, very passionate about sustainability, and love to see that. I think my favorite part of the conversation was the story of Danny. Once again, shout out Danny out there. Anybody can have an impact. Doesn't matter your position, your rank, your role, your title. You can make a suggestion and potentially change how things are done. So that's amazing and inspirational story. Really, really great discussion with Annie. We appreciate them. Shout out Cotopaxi and shout out to Davis, the co-founder. You guys are amazing. You've done some amazing things, and this is a great episode. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you again.